It's Wednesday, December 11th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. November is well in the rearview mirror, but that does not mean the conversation around men's health ends there. Today on the show, we zoom in on an important issue, mental health and wellness for men and boys. Yeah, if you didn't clue to it, the November reference was actually a Movember reference, right? So and if you may have noticed, I know mustaches are more popular now than they used to be. They're back. But for a while, every November, it'd be like, why are all these guys growing mustaches? Because it was for the Movember movement. And so that started like prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and then mental health and suicide prevention. November's done. But like I said, this conversation around mental health for men and boys, you can have this one any day of the year, and it's equally important. Here's a stat from 2022. The Mental Health Commission of Canada found that 75% of the estimated 4,000 suicide deaths that year were men. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for men ages 15 to 19. That's from the Commission. As we jump into this show, the Mental Health and Addictions Crisis Line, 811. The LifeWise Warm Line, which is peer-to-peer support, right? Facilitated staff across the province, 1-855-753-2560. There's also a National Suicide Crisis Helpline, 988. If you would like to join this discussion, the text line is open today, right? If it's your thoughts around mental health for men and boys and what needs to change, the reality of it, text us, 709-327-8206, The Signal at cbc.ca for emails. Full house today. I love having a full house for shows, for important discussions like this. Jody Williams, mindset coach, Buddhist pastoral care worker. Audrey Wade, mental health advocate, suicide survivor parent. Bill Jeffrey of the Lonely Man Project and counselor. Brent Bashara, military veteran and someone who, quote unquote, lives well. Thanks for coming in, folks. Here's the jump off. I'll get you to. I'll ask you in a minute to explain a bit more about yourselves, but I often like to jump in with a question to get us into the topic. And given all of your backgrounds, that question: what's something through your lens that you think people may not realize about men's and or boys' mental health? Bill, we'll start with you.
For me, I think the biggest issue with men and boys' mental health is, and something that doesn't get as much traction when we talk about the symptoms, is the level of apathy that comes with it. We talk a lot about the sadness. We talk about the anger, the masking of the symptoms that men and boys go through. But it's really come clear, especially through my practice focusing on men, that the apathy is just a huge piece. And it goes beyond just not having fun, not enjoying your activities. I've talked to men who for a decade have gone through life just going through the motions, just thought that's how they were now. And I finally realized that, oh no, wait a minute, I've got depression. And I just wasted 10 years of my life because I really didn't care about much of anything. I didn't progress in my career, didn't care about the family, didn't care about my personal hygiene or my health. And the apathy that came with the depression is what really affected them.
So it's depression that caused, because I was going to ask, why is that apathy there? Why do you think that apathy is there?
Well, what depression does is, it affects the pleasure center of the brain. Yeah. So anhedonia is what it's called. So you can't really enjoy things like you used to. Mm-hmm. And the longer that goes on, the more chronic and more devastating it becomes. And so, when we talk about depression, we talk about not wanting to go out, not wanting to go to a birthday party or go to a movie and that sort of thing. But we don't talk to the level that this actually impacts and is devastating to a lot of men's lives.
Brent, what about yourself? What's something you think that folks may not realize?
Well, that's a great question. I just feel that right now it's a challenge for men to find purpose in life. And, I found that leaving the military after my 24 years, on the Friday it's a lot of pats on the backs, but on the Monday it's tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
So, luckily I had a knife-making career I could sink into, but I know a lot of friends that don't have things to lean into. So for me, I feel it's finding purpose, in daily life. Just we have to find purpose to get up each day and put our clothes on, make our bed, and get at it.
And that military side, like the highly structured environment of like, oh, you're getting transferred, you got to move. Well, we got people to help you with that. You got something. Oh, there's someone, and then to go to, now what? And what am I when my life was the military?
And that I call that the daily application. For 24 years, they tell you when to wake up, what to wear, where to go, what to do, when to come home.
Steak night on Thursdays.
That's right. Fish on Fridays.
Yeah.
So, but when you retire on that Monday, if you don't have that daily application or want something to lean into, then again, it's back to tumbleweeds. And that's where I find I was depressed. I didn't know I was depressed until I looked at the symptoms. I said, oh my gosh, I've been depressed. I didn't know it.
What year was that you found that out?
Between in the 2000s.
Yeah.
To 2010 or so.
Yeah, right. So you're out in what, 07? So
yeah.
So that path, it's like, okay, now what? And oh wait, a couple years later, gosh, check. I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll dig into that a little bit more. Thank you for that. Audrey, what about yourself?
I would say that my learning as a parent suicide survivor is that people show up well. My son showed up well until he didn't show up.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big piece of trying to understand what it means to find your way. Like he had graduated high school and couldn't make the next steps into his career or what that was going to look like. And I think, a big part of that is when someone's trying to find their way, they just keep showing up as they do. And what happens is your mental health starts to slip. And because you're showing up every day in all the places that you normally would, in all the ways that you normally would, then it doesn't look like there's anything wrong, right? And in hindsight, it's been 3.5 years out for me as a parent. I can look back and see the things, but in the moment, you don't see them.
Yeah.
So, it's that piece of it for me is trying to understand how do people keep showing up because there is no visible sign, and then it's too late.
Jody?
Yeah, some great points for sure. Same thing, really. I don't think people realize, I guess, how pervasive maybe. I work in the prison system, and I see it over and over. Right, suicide is a huge thing, and it's unfortunately I feel like it's something we sweep under the rug. I mean, even the fact that we're not allowed to say the word anymore, or like some places, it's like trigger. It's like, well. To me, like that's just kind of brushing away the problem, right? We can't say these words.
So I'm thinking of the term sudden death, right?
Yeah, you see it, like parents. It's cool, but what I mean is, like, I think we need to just how pervasive it is, and I think men are very good at kind of being stoic, I guess, and maybe hiding it. And like you said, showing up, right? Just speaking to Brent there, and he said, after buffing up, I said, well, that was because I spent 3 years in a depression it was a dark place, and I gained 50 pounds, and I, like no one really knew, right? It's just I kept it to myself and not really reaching out.
Yeah, you were, because you've been on with your previous job, you're doing media, we see you in the community, right? It's just like, hey, hi, but meanwhile, right, showing up. Right?
Well, the thing is, man, you get really good at putting on the face. Like, I call it functional depression.
Yeah.
I'm someone who's really good at still going while I'm depressed. Just happen to be that kind of person. Some people can't do that. But what happened to me was I just kept getting burnt out because I'm masking, I'm hiding, right? It takes all your energy. And then you go home at night, and then, unfortunately, my daughter sees depressed dad, whereas my coworkers don't.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, I think, and that's where we're at, and one thing I've been trying to do, I cry a lot. Almost every day I cry at some point. Not always tears of sadness, compassion, joy, but one example is I've been trying to not apologize when I cry as a man. And I think even that's a huge step, right? Like, why do we apologize for crying and when it's appropriate?
Yeah.
It's just because men are, we've inherited the patriarchy and misogyny too, right? We got we're a different generation than my parents, and I picked it up off of them. And growing up, I heard lots of things you would never say today of my uncles and family. That was just the way it was back then, but certainly You know, and I think we've come a long way, but I really think right now I feel like we're going backwards a little bit. I feel like we did go, we came up, and now I almost feel like we're starting to go down again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about for the rest of you then? Like, where things are at now, right? Because to Jody's point of just, because I felt like that with a bunch of different levels within society before of growing up, and sometimes I'm not sure if it's because I was younger or whatever, but it felt like progress was being made. Now we look around and it's easy to point to a lot of really serious issues, even though we're talking more than ever before. What do the rest of you think about that, and where we are for the environment of it all?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I absolutely feel like we've gone backwards.
Yeah.
I raised 2 children. Davis would be 22 at this stage. I have an 18-year-old. And I feel like when I started out raising them in a world of, where their needs were met and everything, and, both my boys had diagnoses, so there was always connections in the broader community, medical and, counseling and those sorts of things. But everything seemed accessible back then. And as we move through it, and now having to live with, as a suicide survivor parent, it's not as accessible anymore. And even what was accessible back then wasn't great, if I was going to be completely honest. But it's not even accessible anymore in the way that it was.
So what's not accessible in the way that it was?
Well, you take the emergency departments at the hospitals right now. Like, I say to people all the time, you can't even get in there with real emergency, like broken limbs and those sorts of things. You're sitting for 9, 10, 11, 12 hours. And I think mental health has always been something that's just been pushed aside because it's not visible. I've been at emergency with family members who've sat for 14 hours and very, very, very unwell. And when they finally get triaged, it's not the emergency department that needs to see them. It's another facility.
Yeah.
And so we have to go through that route. And when people aren't well, that's exasperating. They absolutely don't have anything to give to try and make those steps to even get well. And we have a system that doesn't work for it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, those are great points. The emergency room is still a mess, absolutely. I think that, we've been at the Lonely Man Project. We started that, 6-7 years ago.
Yeah, remind folks what that is.
Lonely Man Project is a project to raise awareness of men's mental health and the suicide rate in the province and how it impacts not just men, but families, partners, children, and the depth of which mental health can impact their society. So the way I see it, we started off back 6-7 years ago, and we've come a long way. I think right now at this point in time, people don't realize the amount of work that goes into this when you're lobbying and you're doing backdoor meetings and you're doing presentations anywhere you can get in and all that kind of stuff, which we've all done. I think at this point we're poised to make a huge improvement.
Right.
I think we're on the precipice of that, and I say
Years of work to get
is,
acknowledged.
Yeah, and I can see how people think we're moving backwards, but I think that at this point we have the players lined up in order to make that jump into the next level. And I say that based on like the event we had this summer. Right? You were the host of the
I emceed an event. Tell folks about the.
It was an evening of men's mental health. It was the largest and I guess the first big large scale event for men's mental health in the province. Adam was an MC. We had Dr. Robert Whitley came down from McGill University to be our keynote speaker. Audrey spoke and gave her story, which was, brought the house down. We had Dave D'Entremont, who gave his perspective from a husband and CEO as well. And of course, I had to say a few words on my story, which I did. But the players that were involved in that, like we had the Premier wrote a forward for our program. We had the Health Minister. We had the now Minister of Mental Health, John Abbott. He gave the opening address. So it's taken a long time to get the message out, get the statistics noticed, to get people to recognize what's been going on. But we do finally have the players lined up. We do have the attention. People are noticing what's going on. And the next step is going to be to start putting some of these programs and services in place so that they are more accessible and that we can start making a difference in the community. And we'll have something coming up with the Canadian Mental Health Association to announce real soon.
Something coming.
Something coming down the pipe, yeah. And we're really excited about it. It's going to be a first for the province. And, I hate to say the cavalry is coming, but we've all made great strides. And I think over the next year, you're going to see great improvements in men's mental health because we always had the quiet support. Right? You go around and you talk to people about their men and their boys and their husbands and their dads and their brothers. Right? Everybody's got a story. But the difference with men and with women is that women banded together to say, this is not good enough for us.
Yep.
Right? We want better. The system has to change to reflect our needs. And men are still standing back like, we're fine. We got no problems. Like Jody said, put on the mask. And I've always said that, men have worn masks long before COVID. Right? And you're seeing it at all different ages. I'm seeing young fellas come in, that are lost when they come out of school in my counseling practice.
Yeah.
Right? The world has changed. They weren't prepared when they came in. Right, when they came out of school, I got guys coming in all different transitions in midlife that are looking for purpose. Right, the kids are raised and they're retiring, or their job is done technically because the kids are moved on and it's just them and the wife home, and they can't figure out why they're still here. Right, so it's all different levels of situation. But I think you're going to see a huge jump forward in the next year or so, not only on the amount of services but on the amount of attention that men's mental health and our boys are going to get.
All right, stuff's changing. Brent, what do you think?
I like what Bill said. I've working with Bill. We're also on a committee for men's mental health as well.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I find in this journey of men's mental health, because again, in the military, you see a lot of suicides and trauma and things like that. I think the awareness is going to help also with the families, for the wives and the children, to recognize those signs and symptoms within that vet or that person, so that they are able to get that help, to recognize the signs, so to have it more awareness to what is mental health in general. What are the signs of a person who's going through those issues? Maybe, like, I didn't know I was depressed until I read an article, and oh my God, I'm depressed. Didn't know.
Yeah.
But that's it, to bring that awareness to the family so that we can help those members of the family that need that help soonest.
When I think of stigma, when I think of folks growing up, anger, processing emotions, are we being taught for men and boys, or is the teaching there? And I'll give you an example. So the other couple weeks ago, stopped red light for crosswalk. Light was red. Person behind me started honking his horn, just losing it, and looked very angry. Drove up beside me, tried to give me a piece of his mind, and then sped off. And I was just like, this can't be what? There's more here, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying and I've got you folks around who are the mental health advocates and experts here. But so let's go back to that question around: are we talking about anger, emotions, processing enough, and is that wiring happening to help folks as they grow and mature?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
I think that well, I've been misdiagnosed, bipolar to mood disorder to every single medication to everything, suicidal, homicidal in my 20s, ideation, and I just think that it really does come down to having a purpose to live.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't have a purpose to live, well, you gotta find one. And there's a lack of mentorship out there for men. Like, I grew up, right? Like, our families got smaller, right? So I grew up and I had 15 uncles. And they would take me out and we go do stuff and skating and stuff, right? Families now are down to 1, 2, maybe. So I really think that's a huge gap, is mentorship, like a healthy relationship with a man. I think men are lacking in healthy relationships with other men, and generally speaking.
Yes, that side-by-side activity that folks talk about, right? Like, it's healthy. Like, you want your mentor, go out, make the birdhouse, go do the fishing, go play, whatever, right? But that's time in with someone older who's a role model and mentor, and it's a healthy thing. It's not drinking in the shed, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what, especially in Newfoundland, right? It's like, I started a men's yoga group, and that was why. It's like, well, what does someone like me do that doesn't go out and drink on Friday night, or what do you do when you're so I started a group for men to try to create a space where there's not this one-upmanship men do, where it's like I'm stronger. So I tried to create a space, which I did, where there's none of that. Just a bunch of older guys out of shape doing some yoga. Yeah. but it's the safe space, and it's the getting together, getting out of the house, stop being isolated, which we all do. I will admit, when I am depressed, I go into total isolation mode
Yeah.
because I feel like nobody wants to really hear about or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
No, I do.
and like, and not only that, like, who do I actually talk to? Or like, so I can't, but I have a lot of tools, right? I teach mindfulness meditation and I teach this stuff with other people. But when it comes to your own self, of course, those tools are, because you have blind spots, right?
Yeah, and then you ask last, like, who am I to voice this? I don't want to do it. I give a trauma dump on someone, but at the same time, I need someone to talk to. And this is why, like, we talk about a lot of times your peer-to-peer support, right? That could be just another guy at a yoga class that you know a little bit about, but it's like, no, I get it, right?
Yeah,
You're feeling down.
Yep, and that's what I think. It's just a lack of mentorship again. Like I said, when I grew up, even teachers, I mean, like now I think a lot of these relationships before, like everyone's on their phones and it's very social media, and we don't have deep connections. I think the days of deep seem to be gone. We're skimming things,
Yeah, well, I mean, when we came in here, right, everyone's like, "Oh, hi," and like the comment you made, it just because we're a lot of times we know someone because that little tiny circle on a screen, whether it's a smartphone or whatever, right? Because this is the life we live, right? So, but what's the connection there? If that's your connection is just the circle, as opposed to like this in person, where we can see each other's eyes and feel, like the fact that there's a presence, a human being in front of us. Right?
And the problem with the emotional regulation side of it, like, no, we don't teach it at a level that's sufficient right now. Right? The issue is, like, you got Jody, you got myself, you got Brent in a different age group. Then you got the young fellas that are in high school. And there's no one-size-fits-all umbrella approach to fix this.
Yeah.
Like, the next evolution for mental health has to be these targeted programs to start addressing these issues. I got invited in last summer into or last fall, spring, I guess. I can't use the calendar. Into a high school to do a session with 16 graduating seniors. The principal invited me in. Wasn't sure exactly what I was going to talk about when I got in there. I said, I'd kind of feel it out as we went in. So we did some introductions and chatted a little bit. And I asked them what it meant to be a man.
Wow.
And they gave me all the same old mantras that I had 30-odd years ago. Right? Be strong, be competitive, be dominant. One kid said, beat up other kids. Right, that's what it means to be a man, and it really dawned on me that we haven't done work with our boys.
Yeah,
like, we haven't addressed the masculinity and trying to challenge the traditional masculinity that they have. So they're coming out with these same mantras, but the world's changed all around them.
And online are like endless rabbit holes of toxic masculinity.
Yes, yeah. And I don't like the word toxic per se. It's a behavior
problematic, you name it.
Yeah, and
I'm thinking of Andrew Tate. Right?
You think of Andrew Tate, and these kids are coming out of school, and these same boys would have graduated a month or so later, and they're coming out with the same mindset that we had coming out. Only they're finding out that when they come out into the real world, they're finding that they're supposed to be shamed, and they are toxic, and that it's might not be okay to be a young man. However, when they look over at this side, well, there's Andrew Tate with 69 cards and hordes of women and all the money in the world, beckoning to him.
Yeah, and
so which
and
side
not
do
a
you
role
think
model.
Not a role model.
No.
Yeah. Right. Which side are you going to gravitate towards as a 19-year-old kid? I can feel bad about myself, or I can have all the optimism and feel fantastic. So as a society, we haven't done a good enough job of trying to just move traditional masculinity and address it to the middle. Yeah. Give them more champions, give them more role models, people that they can emulate, people that they're going to want to be. I go back to the U.S. election, which is still pretty contentious, and you look at Donald Trump, right? And nobody seemed to pick up on the fact that of course, a lot of men voted in the last election, and we know how that all turned out. But did anybody notice the song he's been dancing to for his last 2 elections? YMCA. What are the first words in the YMCA? Young man. Yeah. There's no need to feel down. I said, young man. Right? For the last 2 elections, he's been speaking to men. Yeah. And it worked. Yeah. Right? So these guys are gravitating towards. So we got a lot of work to do on that front. With the kids coming out of school, I'd like to polish up a program and go into the schools and start teaching the kids some of this. We need to reach them at a younger age, teach them about healthy relationships, what that looks like. But not only managing your emotions, and that goes through the younger kids as well as the older folks, but also being able to effectively communicate them. Yep. Because I got a lot of guys coming in that are 30, 40 years old, and they don't know how to communicate, even with their wives, to tell them what's going on, to try and explain how they're feeling. Right? They don't have the tools. And some of the guys are coming in, they're having great results when they pick these tools up. But there's a lot of we talk about suicide, and the suicide rate in our province, last year was 80% male.
Yep.
Right.
The year before was 82% male, right, which is stark. It's a stark number when the average is 75%. We're above average.
Wow.
And a lot of these guys are having issues with their wives when we talk about the suicide, but it's not always suicide.
Yeah.
Families are breaking up. There's domestic violence issues. There's guys turning to gambling, coping skills that are not healthy, drinking, all that type of thing. And we're not talking enough about how that impacts our families. We focus a lot on the suicide, but it takes a lot to get to that point.
Yeah, there's a lot more, right? And what you just what you just mentioned. Folks, you're listening to The Signal. Today on the show, we are talking about mental health for men and boys, what needs to change, how to get there, what the reality is. The text line is open, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. Here's a couple texts. Online role models for young men, ? Right? We're just kind of talking about that. I remember a conversation about Andrew Tate. It touches on the lack of mentorship that Jody said. Here's another one. Hi, a generalization. Girls start having mental health trouble earlier. For boys, men, it starts when they're away at college or university or another province for work. A kind of perfect storm when they have new stressors, a lot of evaluation from peers, new professor, new boss, and their usual supports who are also people that would recognize changes are not around. Also not living at home in high school. They can easily hide and pretend everything is fine on the phone. Folks, thanks for those texts. If more come in, I will, pepper them through the conversation because it's I always appreciate the input. Brent, does that speak to you for just either because we talked about the military, right? But you typically come into that, you're young, you're typically young, right? And then you go through, like you said, like there's that. The military is everything for your process, and then on the end of the pipeline, question marks. But what are your thoughts then around just some of the mental health and everything for those inputs?
Well, very valid points, absolutely. The one thing that really comes to mind, and Bill and I have had discussions about this, is getting into the schools earlier. The ability to be still and know thyself. So I've been studying breath work and meditation since '95. It was one of the things that helped me in the military. Yeah. So one of the things I'm working towards, not only just world peace, and it's not a cliche, but I've been studying this since '95, but also speaking in schools since '06. And in speaking in schools I wasn't getting enough traction, between 12 and 30 kids or assemblies. I started doing assemblies this year, but I wasn't getting enough traction. So I've come up with a breathwork program for schools, K to 12, to be able to have the emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, to be able to understand, I'm getting a little stressed out. I will have a tool through breath to de-escalate and dissipate my feelings right now, to be able to regulate them and be able to communicate effectively to other people. So hopefully in the new year this will be implemented.
Excellent. Audrey, what about yourself? Any thoughts?
Well, I think one of those points really hits home. My son died in 2021.
Yeah.
What I consider still the height of COVID. He was an athlete. Sports had shut down. NHL was no longer available on TV. All of the things. And he had graduated high school. So he had graduated, had a plan. His big dream was to be in sports medicine, and athletic therapist was his goal. And when he started to apply to school, and at that point, again, during COVID, everything was capped. So there was no real strong path forward. He had been employed since he was 15. He was, a all-around great kid. He had lots of future ahead of him. Yeah. But the layers of COVID, we had a family death. He'd graduated high school. When he was in school, we had a tremendous support system in our school. If he had a bad night, I let the principal know the next morning. If he had a bad day, she let me know at the end of the day. So we were always in constant contact and keeping on top of his low points, right? Lots of times he didn't even know about that. And Davis was a really articulate, very bright kid, so he could, articulate his feelings. He could articulate what was happening inside his brain. He could tell you, what that looked like and how it felt and all of the things. And yet, there was still the stigma attached to all of that. He was safe to talk about it with mom or dad or a particular few others. And in school, it was, widely accepted that he could easily have a bad day but outside of that, So when high school finished and there was no other place to go and the support system started to fall apart, so did he.
Where do we go with stigma? Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I just want to
Yeah, no, jump
in on,
Yeah.
like, one of the things that I notice, again, I work in the prison system, but mostly with myself. So I did meditated for 25 years, and I thought it was kind of my mind that was running the show. So I was dealing a lot with that. Over the past few years, through my study and my own self-reflection, and I'm witnessing it, is it's really the nervous system, right? So if you have trauma, like a lot of the people I deal with have trauma, right? So they're kind of stuck in that fight or flight mode, right? And I go back to what Brett was saying, like, what I see, well, there's four things. I think, and this is a human thing, I think the being bored and lonely are the cause of most of our problems in society and people's inability to deal with just being bored or lonely. So then you drink, you do all those things. But what I do see that causes like I said, I'm in prison a bit, so it's a little bit extreme, but the fighting and the stuff, right? It's a lack of impulse control and a lack of anger control, right? They don't have any techniques, like a breathing technique is about something I teach, or giving them tools to do a reframe, and it's really working with the nervous system in my mind for a lot of this stuff, which is not really talked about. There's a lot of new science out on that. Ultimately, it's the mind and the thoughts that are kind of causing the distress that you feel right inside. Your thoughts are rumination, and those are the kind of. But your nervous system in the background is kind of running the show, especially if you have trauma and you're stuck in that, like I said. And to give people just simple tools, what sucks really is like everything I teach, meditation, mindfulness, positive neuroplasticity, everything I teach is free to do. Yeah. It costs nothing to do. And unfortunately, it's like, how do we bridge, how do we give these free tools out when only the privileged people have access to them? The wellness world is full of privilege, let me tell you that. I work in the wellness industry. Yeah. And all I see is privilege everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I'll see it on my social media, right? It's like, hey, like it's a wellness retreat and it's somewhere tropical, right? But then I'm talking to you about folks in the prison system, and I'm thinking trauma, I'm thinking poverty, and a lot of other things that have nothing to do with that wellness world of just self-help. This is there's social determinants of health issues that get brought up with this.
Absolutely.
And there's a whole lot more to be talked about with those layers.
Yep, for sure. Go ahead.
No, that's it. That was the thought. Just kind of like, when you talk about it, right? Just the range, right? Which, Bill, it comes up to some of you're like, it's complex. Like what we're talking about, it's complex, right? It's not like, well, here's the silver bullet, we're done. There's a lot of things, which is why, you look at a time where there's an education accord happening, there's a health accord that's happening. We talk about social determinants of health. We talk about loneliness and stigma. When it comes to stigma, how do we move through it? Because it's we don't, men don't like talking about stuff. Then there's the saying, man up. Right, which comes into it, and then there's also that term failure to launch. Right, you get young boys and men nowadays who are stuck at home and not getting out into the world. But then we have that stigma bit to lay on top of it. Any thoughts around just the airing of what needs to happen to defeat the stigma here and to identify some of these issues that young folks are going through?
Well, messaging is a huge part. Right, like you remember the last campaign we had on men's mental health, the widespread campaign that you saw the billboards and the buses. No, me either.
Yeah,
because we never had
exactly.
Right, so you got Brent sitting here, saying he didn't know he was depressed. I didn't know I had depression back when I first experienced it myself. Yeah, right. There's a lot of guys going through that have no idea that they have depression, that they're struggling, or why they're struggling with things that are going on. The messaging needs to change. We need to normalize men getting help. With a lot of the work that we're doing at the Lonely Man Project, simply put, we need to redefine what it means to be a man. Yeah, simple.
It reminds me of so we did a show on body safety, right? So it's a course going through the schools now, and it's teaching children how the language to use around what could be happening in very inappropriate, exploitative situations with adults and people close to them. Because one of the problems that folks have seen is young people don't even have that language to use. But this conversation is making me think of that with respect to mental health and boys and men. And sometimes growing up in the beginning, not even knowing perhaps the language to use to get to the point of being like, oh, there's an issue. Now others, though, they do have that language and they know. It could depend on the household. What do you folks think about that?
Well, I'm going to jump in and say I think it begins in the school system.
Yeah.
A lot of it. Like, as parents, a lot happens and begins at home. But we rely on the school system to educate our children. And what does education look like?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, without mental health, our whole health is affected. And we can see things that are visible and put our finger on it. But mental health doesn't look like that. So if we go back to the school system and have appropriate programming for all children of all ages, then I think that's a starting point. I talk all the time about how the safety, your psychological safety. Yep. And my son was psychologically safe in his school. Outside of that, he wasn't. Not all kids are in their school. So education is key. And I think it's much broader than what we're delivering right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. Like, really, honestly, the only solution, I shouldn't say the only solution, but, like, we have to get them in school. School is the only place where everybody's equal. The poor kids and the rich kids, they still go to school. And they're taught what they're taught. We live in the age of Google. You don't need to learn history anymore. You can Google anything. Let's start teaching things, skills. Let's start teaching emotional regulation. Let's start teaching communication. Let's start teaching, how to be in a healthy relationship. How to do a budget, for God's sakes. Just these life skills. We live in a world of AI and Google. I mean, my daughter's only 14. She's in grade 9. And I know she's doing great, but honestly, as a parent, I just see some of the stuff she's doing, and I'm like, I don't know. I just don't think it's feasible, and I think that it's outdated. I don't think, the world's moving so fast right now that stuff they're learning in school in 4 years is not going to matter anyway. But the skill sets of emotional regulation, no matter what happens in the world, you're always going to need them, right?
So then what's so different now, and obviously like social media is a big part of it, in terms of like what is different. But if we go back 20, 30 years ago, how are things different now to then? And or is there a through line where it's like, oh, actually, Adam, it's always been bad. Like, we're like, which is true for so many things. But like, what do you think about that difference of looking back to when you were young or growing up to the realities for young men, boys now?
Well, for a lot of men, I mean, the world's changed. Men always define themselves by what they contributed, what they brought into the household. They were the breadwinners. They knew who they were by what they contributed. That's not the case anymore. Right? The world has changed. Women are working, men are working. There's two parent families that are, going flat out. I know, like, my dad would have went to a lodge back growing up. Like, a lot of men don't have time to go to a lodge now. We're stop at the bar on the way home and talk to the original psychotherapist, the bartender, that sort of thing. So all the responsibilities are switched around. Like, they're involved in every aspect. Not all men. A lot of dads are involved in every aspect. They're taking the kids to hockey. They're doing dishes. They're taking care of the cars outside. Not being me, because I'm not good at that. But they're involved with all aspects of life. That's changed for men. The responsibilities and the roles. The difference being that we haven't prepared the boys coming out for that change.
Exactly.
Right. So they don't know how to handle it. Why would they? Right. You get a lot of men now that have grown up, and I always say, like, we want men to change. We want men to be better. We want men to But we've never given them programs or services to do that. We just say, don't be yourself. Don't be exactly who we raised you to be in society. Stop that.
So you think, is that inputs from older folks about a time that doesn't exist anymore to the younger folks, and then they're coming out expecting like a promise or a package that is not there? Is that what it is? Because like, if you're young, you don't know what happened before, right? Unless someone's telling you.
Yeah. Well, ideally, you look at the different age groups, right?
Yeah.
Like, my age group is different than what's the boys coming out of school now. When we talk about going into the schools, we've got a big opportunity here to change the next generation.
Yep.
Right? But that doesn't do anything for the generation that's already out and trying to navigate the world and figure out all these changes around them. So as I said earlier, we need to have some targeted approaches at different age groups to really make a difference in this. It's no good just to say we're going to focus on the men, and the highest suicide rate is in the 50-plus group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
It's not going to affect the suicide rate as much as if we focus our time and efforts there.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Jody's doing his thing at his level, helping out at the men, in the system. Audrey's doing her thing. Bill's doing his thing. The one thing that came to me about a month ago, I got a bit of a vision, was that it's through the children. Our children are our greatest natural resource. Yeah. And by investing, because you wouldn't charge your child to learn how to tie their shoes. That's why it's got to be for free. Yeah. So the program I've come up with, and I might be putting the cart before the horse, but I believe in it wholeheartedly, that it's a 2-minute program where homerooms at 8 o'clock, let's say, at 8:05, it's boom, boom over the PA, and it's just, hey, we're going to do a box breath. We're going to breathe. And it's just a pre-recorded, but the whole class, it's for students and staff to bring that emotional awareness, the emotional intelligence. It helps the teacher to prepare to deliver the content, but also the students that have come home, or come from home. Where's your shoes? Get your coat. It's pajama day. Where's your lunch? All these, and they come to class, and everyone's like, wow. And so to be able to just take a 2-minute timeout, it costs nothing. Yeah. It's 120 seconds, but the emotional benefits, the intelligence, the compassion, the gratitude that comes from that, it will reduce suicides. And just by committing 120 seconds to our mental well-being, and the commitment to the routine is success. And when we commit to that routine over and over, then we'll be able to recognize within each individual that emotional intelligence and awareness to say, hey, I'm a little stressed out. I'm going to just breathe for a bit here and deregulate and de-escalate my situation.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Audrey.
I was just going to say, when we talk stigma, that's where I think the key is. When we normalize those things, and you're talking about institutions right now that educate. Education belongs in so many more places than institutions, and it's a broad range for a whole self, and not just, certain capacities of ourself. So I think the stigma and ending stigma starts with places like Brent just described.
Yeah. And I think, when I was an executive director, even here now, I still people would perceive me as a leader in society.
Yeah, you used to be with Bridges of Hope, executive director, right?
Well, I mean, even now I'm still but at the end of the day, it's important. There was a time in my life, maybe I wouldn't come on here and talk about my own mental health, right? Maybe I wouldn't, but it's important to me. I don't care what people think about me. What's important to me is someone like me being willing to go on the air, be vulnerable, tell the truth, tell it like it is, say my own struggles. And then I think people associate mental health with the poor people and the drug addicts and there's kind of vibe.
It's easy for it to be an other, right? It's them.
No, man, it's also the corporate guy who makes $250,000 a year that's gone home and drinking every night. Yeah. We're not talking about that. You know what I mean? That's and I think that's a huge problem, right? It's the lack of men willing to come into the space and just say openly, man, I don't feel good. I'm not okay.
So what are the things that someone like yourself or for the rest of you, because for example, in my job, people email me or call me all the time for show ideas and everything else. And every so often, it honestly, it's a mental health call too, right? Which I get. And I'm not in your folks' world. So then what is it that there's the public side of talking, which we're doing now, and all of you are sharing. But then there's the
DMs,
the private side, the DMs, the things that people will not talk about outwardly. What are those folks? What are obviously don't betray any, but what are some examples of things that you hear from folks?
I will honestly say I get one DM a week at least from a guy, and it's a long. And then they disappear, and it happens over and over and over. They reach out.
Yeah, and it's not the same guy, right? Different person each time.
Different person. Yeah, they have this attempt where they kind of reach out, and it's someone like me, for my own mental health, there was a time when I would spend Friday nights on Facebook Messenger trying to counsel some guy I never met in my life. I had to stop doing that for my own mental health. Right? I had to create some boundaries because that's what I was doing. And now, but I'm so now I'll be I have the men's yoga Wednesday nights, I have a retreat coming up. And then, unfortunately, what I'm seeing is men they're not taking that next step. So my question is, what are the pain points? What's stopping that man? He reached out to me. I gave him some offers, but there's then it ends, right? So what are the pain points? Obviously, some of it could be financial.
Yeah.
Some of it could be stigma. I just did a retreat. There was 2 men at it. We had to do a group picture at the end. The 2 men, of course. I said, does anyone not want to be in the group picture that's going to be shown publicly?
Yeah.
The 2 men, gone. Right? Because it was a self-care retreat. One was a doctor and one was a dentist. And they were like, no, I'm good. I'm just not, I don't want no one knowing I'm on a self-care retreat. So, like, this is a problem, right?
Now, before I ask the others, do you think that is there more of that in Newfoundland and Labrador than perhaps up on the mainland, to use that, like the rest of Canada or North America? What do you think?
Yeah, I speak to other people in the wellness world. I have lots of friends in that world, generally speaking. And from what I hear, it's like 50-50. You go to yoga class, here it's like 2 men and the rest women, or a meditation. Like I had 60 people at a retreat recently. Again, 2 men, all women. Another retreat, 2 men, all women, 45 people. But again, I think in Newfoundland, I don't like to say men are behind. I just like to say that
It's in a different place than others.
I still think we have. Like I'm way different than my dad, right? Like I think there was a huge generational thing from like our generation. I think we've changed a lot. The fact that we're even on here talking about this, my dad certainly wouldn't. But yeah, it's still, it's we in Newfoundland. I find men there's something stopping men. There's still some pain points, and I'm curious to, like, what is it? Is it the stigma? Is it money? And it could be all those things. I'm not saying this is a really complex problem, but if these are the problems, then how do we take them away?
Right.
And I'd like to speak to that. Is that, again, back to we haven't had the vocabulary to be able to emotionally express ourselves. We don't understand it. So all we can rely on is the sitcom shows that we've been watching to be able to express ourselves. Well, that's no longer functional or viable. So back to the point of the sooner we can get a breathwork program into the schools to be able to re-regulate their emotional intelligence and awareness, to be able to express themselves, vocabulary, to be able to create more empathy, less apathy, more gratitude and understanding for our fellow people, we're going to create a stronger community. And again, back to the point, our children are our greatest natural resource. We must invest in their ability to be critical thinkers and be able to help out our society. I want smart kids that care, that have empathic skills, because they're going to create better medicines, technology, school systems, bum wiping machines, the important stuff.
Hey, very important. Audrey?
Well, 2 things pop in my head. One is I'm an early childhood educator, so I think it starts before school.
Yeah.
So let's include parents and all the community places that, young children are at. I actually have trained in infant mental health. And so, when I sit back and think of places that I've been over my 30-year career, there's a place and time where there are things already available to us. And the other thing I'm going to say is my boy grew up a Bay boy.
Yeah.
I grew up in rural Newfoundland. I raised my children in rural Newfoundland. And there's a difference. He was safe inside his own home. And even just to hear you speak, Jody, I could visualize him, safe in his own space. But when he took that step out the door, the hair had to be perfect. The ball had to match. All of the things that just, he became different because he had an image and a mask to wear. And it's so pronounced to me at this stage when I can reflect back. And I'm like, yeah, he showed up differently.
That's the word that I thought at the start of the show when you like the introductions that we all started talking, that word mask was what came into my mind, right?
Yeah.
And looking around, wondering how many of us are just, and everyone has a certain amount of a mask, right? You go into work or whatever else, but on the mental health side of it, right? That mask that folks wear, and you don't know.
And I think about the energy it takes to wear that mask. And imagine if we could take that energy and be well. Just imagine.
We did, so on Monday, we did a Pride in Newfoundland and Labrador show for the holidays, right? And talking about the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And one of the things that came up, so there's this, it's called a chosen family dinner. Because sometimes in the community, there can be difficulties with your blood relatives, right? Sure. And one of the things that came out of this discussion about the benefit of these dinners was, because I asked, well, what does it give, right? So, it's a safe space, you're there. And I asked, like, well, what, like afterwards, is there an attachment, is there a boost, a benefit? And the way it was described was that it's like those are a recharge for all the other times. outside of it, in community. And then when I think of this wearing a mask bit, safe at home, but then it's the depletion of the battery out, right? These are different conversations, but at the same time, not that different.
Very similar.
Very similar.
Yeah.
You know, like our phones, right? We have to we plug them in sometimes. We can't,
Yeah.
we have to get plugged in, right?
Right.
We have to do the same thing.
Yeah, or are you trying to make a call with 10% left, right?
Well, that's what I mean. It's like, and I at the mask thing, man. I'll tell you, it's like the biggest problem. I think it's. I remember, in my previous employment, again, I was a very stressful job, and I went through a 3-year depression, and you can't call in sick every day, right?
Yeah.
That's the other part. It's like when you have a major mental health issues, and you're just you gotta go. I got a daughter to feed. I said the words that you should never say. Suck it up.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's systemic issues there. You know, at the end of the day, like I honestly feel, as a man, my mental health issues were treated differently than coworkers who were female.
Yeah.
Mine weren't taken as seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm just being truthful. That's facts.
This is part of the stigma. That's a stigma conversation, right?
That is facts.
That's part of the stigma conversation.
You know?
Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah. When I retired from the military, I went to Kingston, Ontario, and took a peer support for occupational stress injury, so that I'd be able to sit with other military members who were having issues, right? Because you don't want to, as a military member, you don't want to be talking to a civilian. They just wouldn't understand it. So I took a course. But the big thing that they really stressed on that course, if you're going to enter into that wellness world, is your self-care. And they really stress that so much that as we expose ourselves to trauma or stresses or occurrences, to be able to regulate ourselves and be able to either disengage, to be able to sit still, know ourselves through breath work, meditation, going for walks. But they really stress the whole time along that self-care is your responsibility. You can't rely on anybody else for your self-care. You got to do it yourself and find that each day.
We got another text. We're getting down there now, too, in time for the show. Good day, Adam. 3 quick things. COVID damaged our youth mental health in ways that we don't quite yet understand. Smartphones are directly linked to anxiety and depression. We have an epidemic addiction to those. And finally, our youth are living their reality through their smart devices and aren't developing or living a reality of their own. I think the only hope is to have periods of breaking away from technology, getting outside, getting back to direct human interactions where we depend on each other and support one another. Thank you so much for that text. I will say, folks, as we leave the show, getting ready to leave, the signal at cbc.ca for emails. Final thoughts, like not long. Bill, final thought for today?
Final thought is, you know what, there's a lot of different workplaces and stuff. We never even got into rotational workers and that type of work today. It's another show in itself. Ideally, you know what, if you're thinking it can happen to you, or you're some men in your life, then you're fooling yourself. It can happen to anybody, and mental health issues do not discriminate.
Brent, final thought?
There's tried, tested skills and drills out there. Be still, know thyself. Learn how to breath work. A simple box breath, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold. Box breath, look it up. It's a lifesaver. It saved my life.
Audrey?
I would say that mental health is part of our whole health, and that's a bigger conversation that we need to continue to have.
Yeah, we can continue these conversations here on the show and in other places because everyone needs to be talking about this stuff. Jody, 20 seconds to you.
Well, yeah, just to keep the conversation going. You know, the fact that I think it was last month was Men's Mental Health Month, and I didn't hear peep. There was no social media. There was nothing, and I was so upset about it. I'm like, I can't even believe that it's Men's Mental Health Month, and there's nothing, as if it didn't exist. I don't know if it's swarmed up with Christmases too. I don't even know. I was so upset. I didn't, not verbally, vocally, but certainly I could not believe the lack of just talk about it.
Well, we should talk about it. Thank you. Jody Williams, Audrey Wade, Bill Jeffrey, Brent Bashara. Thank you all so much, folks. That concludes our mental health show for men and boys. Again, if you have thoughts for us, thesignal@cbc.ca. Call the Signal line and leave a message, 709-576-5260. Tomorrow on the show, the regime of Bashar al-Assad is no more. It is a new day in Syria. Tomorrow, we are asking what comes next for the country, its people, the Syrian diaspora. We will have a conversation with some local members of the Syrian community tomorrow.